The twin suns of Redania cast their amber light through the crystalline forest as Ethan Reeves adjusted his bioscanner for the third time that morning. The device had been acting up ever since he'd dropped it in a puddle of what he'd optimistically labeled harmless alien goo the previous week. His boots crunched softly on the prismatic undergrowth, each step releasing tiny sparkles that danced in the air before dissolving into the atmosphere. Day 14 of specimen collection, he muttered into his recorder, ducking under a low-hanging branch that chimed like wind bells. Still no sign of intelligent life, unless you count the squirrel things that keep stealing my lunch rations. He paused to glare at a nearby tree where a furry, six-legged creature chittered at him mockingly while clutching what remained of his protein bar. Note to self, request squirrel-proof containers in next supply drop. The Kepler research station hummed in the distance, its solar collectors gleaming against the violet sky. Ethan had been stationed here for 8 months now, cataloging the bewildering variety of flora and fauna on this frontier world. It wasn't exactly the glamorous xenobiology career he'd dreamed of during his university days, but it beat his previous assignment studying fungal spores in the asteroid mines of Ceres. His scanner finally stabilized as he approached a grove of towering shadowbloom plants. These particular specimens had been giving him headaches all week, literally. Their spores contained psychoactive compounds that made humans dizzy and nauseous, though the local wildlife seemed immune. The research team had been trying to understand why for months, with little success beyond a collection of very detailed nausea reports. Fascinating, Ethan said to no one in particular, examining a cluster of the dark purple flowers. You're beautiful, toxic, and completely incomprehensible. You'd fit right in at my last family reunion. A soft chiming sound caught his attention, different from the natural music of the crystal trees. He followed the sound deeper into the grove, his scanner picking up unusual biosignatures. The readings were unlike anything in their database, which was saying something considering the catalog of bizarre life forms they'd already documented. The chiming grew weaker as he approached its source. Behind a fallen crystal log, partially hidden beneath a carpet of luminescent moss, lay something that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. It was no larger than his palm, with gossamer wings that shimmered with all the colors of Redania's aurora. The creature's tiny body pulsed weakly with bioluminescent patterns, and its wings barely fluttered against the moss. "Oh, you poor little thing," Ethan whispered, kneeling beside it. His scanner went wild, displaying readings that seemed to fluctuate between categorizing the creature as plant, animal, and something entirely other. The biosignature was incredibly complex, more sophisticated than anything they'd encountered on Verdania. The creature's light was fading, and Ethan could see the telltale purple dust of shadowbloom spores coating its wings. Somehow, it had been exposed to a concentrated dose of the toxic pollen. In larger creatures, such exposure caused temporary paralysis. For something this small, it was clearly fatal. Ethan's communicator crackled to life. "Reeves, report your position," came the gruff voice of Commander Brooks. "You're approaching the restricted zone." "Just collecting some moss samples, Commander," Ethan replied, carefully scooping the dying creature into his specimen container. "Nothing unusual to report." "Well, keep it that way. And remember, all biological samples go through decontamination before entering the station. Dr. Martinez nearly had a coronary when Johnson brought back those singing flowers last month." "Copy that, Commander." Ethan switched off his communicator and looked down at the creature in his hands. Through the transparent aluminum of the container, he could see its light growing dimmer. "Sorry, little friend, but protocol is about to take a vacation." The walk back to Kepler Station felt longer than usual. Ethan kept checking on his unexpected passenger, watching the faint pulse of its bioluminescence like a tiny heartbeat. He'd never seen anything like it in all his years of xenobiological study. The wing structure alone defied conventional understanding of flight mechanics, and the way its cellular matrix seemed to shift and adapt was unprecedented. "Ethan." Dr. Sarah Martinez's voice echoed across the station's landing platform as he approached. "Perfect timing. I need someone to help me calibrate the new atmospheric processors." Sarah was brilliant, dedicated, and unfortunately possessed an almost supernatural ability to appear whenever Ethan was trying to avoid attention. She also had an annoying habit of being right about almost everything, especially when it came to safety protocols. "Actually, Sarah, I was just about to file my daily report and then grab some lunch," Ethan said, clutching his sample bag a little tighter. "Maybe after that?" "Lunch can wait. Science waits for no one." She fell into step beside him as they entered the station's airlock. "Besides, you look like you've been eating nothing but ration bars for weeks. You're starting to resemble one of those stick insects we found in Sector 7. Charming comparison. Really makes a guy feel attractive." The decontamination chamber hissed around them as they waited for the cycle to complete. Ethan tried to look casual while the scanners analyzed their gear for biological contaminants. The creature in his bag was so small he hoped it wouldn't register, or if it did, that the automated systems would classify it as harmless. "Biological anomaly detected in Bag 7, announced the computer in its annoyingly cheerful voice. "Classification: unknown. Recommend full analysis before proceeding." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Unknown? That's unusual. What did you find out there?" "Probably just picked up some spores on my equipment," Ethan said quickly. "You know how sensitive these scanners are. Last week it flagged my sock as a potential biohazard. That's because you hadn't changed it in 4 days. I could smell it from the next room." Point taken. The decontamination cycle completed, and Ethan headed for the exit before Sarah could ask more questions. "I'll just dump this stuff in my quarters and meet you in the lab in 20 minutes. Make it 10. "And Ethan?" Sarah's voice carried a note of suspicion. "If you're hiding something interesting, I will find out. I have an advanced degree in finding out things." "Noted," Ethan called back, already hurrying down the corridor toward his quarters. His room was small but comfortable, with a workstation, a narrow bed, and a window that offered a spectacular view of Verdania's crystal forests. More importantly, it had a basic medical kit and some equipment he'd been using for his personal research projects. Ethan gently transferred the creature to a larger container filled with the sterile atmosphere mix they used for sensitive specimens. Under better lighting, he could see the intricate patterns on its wings and the way its bioluminescence seemed to pulse in complex rhythms. It was definitely still alive, but barely. "Okay, little friend, let's see what we can do about those toxins." He pulled up his database of shadowbloom chemical compounds on his workstation. "Lucky for you, I've been poisoned by these things enough times to know exactly what we're dealing with." The antidote was relatively simple to synthesize, but scaling it down for something so small would be tricky. Too much and he'd kill the creature outright. Too little and it wouldn't be effective. Ethan worked carefully, using his knowledge of comparative xenobiology to estimate the proper dosage. "You know," he said to the creature as he prepared the treatment, "this is either going to save your life or make me the galaxy's most incompetent xenobiologist." No pressure. A knock at his door made him freeze. "Ethan? Are you in there?" Sarah's voice carried through the metal. "It's been 15 minutes. Just getting cleaned up," he called back, quickly hiding the container under his bed. "Be right there. I can hear you talking to yourself in there. That's either a sign of genius or madness, and I'm betting on madness. Very funny. Give me 2 more minutes." He waited until her footsteps retreated before pulling the container back out. The creature's light was even dimmer now, and its wing movements had almost stopped entirely. There was no time for careful calculations. Ethan administered the antidote using the finest delivery system he had, watching anxiously as the microscopic dose entered the creature's system. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the bioluminescent patterns began to brighten. "Come on," he whispered. "Work with me here." The creature's wings fluttered weakly, then with more strength. The patterns of light across its body began to shift and change, becoming more complex and organized. Whatever this thing was, it was definitely more than just another pretty alien butterfly. His communicator buzzed. "Reeves, you're late for your appointment with Dr. Martinez," Commander Brooks' voice growled. "And the atmospheric readings from your sector are showing some unusual fluctuations. Everything all right out there?" "On my way, Commander. Everything's normal." Ethan looked down at the creature, which was now glowing steadily and seemed to be watching him with what might have been intelligence. "At least, it's normal for Verdania." He set up a feeding system using a diluted nutrient solution and adjusted the container's environmental controls to match the conditions in the crystal forest. The creature would be safe here while he dealt with Sarah and her atmospheric processors. "I'll be back in a few hours," he told it softly. "Try not to do anything too miraculous while I'm gone." As he headed for the door, Ethan could have sworn he heard the creature's chiming grow stronger, almost as if it were trying to respond. He paused, looking back at the container, but the sound faded into the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Outside his quarters, the corridors of Kepler Station buzzed with their usual activity. Researchers hurried between labs, maintenance crews worked on the endless task of keeping everything running in an alien environment, and the ever-present Commander Brooks prowled the halls looking for violations of protocol. What none of them knew was that in Quarters 7C, something unprecedented was beginning to happen. Something that would change everything Ethan thought he knew about life, the universe, and the proper way to handle first contact situations. But first, he had to survive Sarah's atmospheric processor calibration without accidentally mentioning that he was harboring an illegal alien in his sock drawer. Ethan's alarm buzzed at 0600 station time, but he'd been awake for hours listening to the soft humming coming from under his bed. The sound had started around midnight, a melodic vibration that seemed to resonate through the station's hull plating. He'd initially assumed it was another malfunction in the environmental systems, but the frequency was too organic, too purposeful. Rolling out of bed with the grace of a sedated elephant, Ethan nearly tripped over his own boots while reaching for the container. What he found made him question whether he'd accidentally inhaled some of those hallucinogenic spores from Sector 12. The creature had doubled in size overnight. "What are you hiding, Reeves?" Before he could answer, a soft melodic sound emanated from somewhere near the floor. Sarah froze, her head tilting like a hunting dog that had caught a scent. "Was that your stomach?" she asked. "Extremely advanced hunger pains," Ethan said quickly. "I should probably grab breakfast before I waste away to nothing." The sound came again, more complex this time, with harmonic overtones that seemed to create music in the air itself. Sarah's eyes widened as she pulled out a handheld bioscanner. "That's not your stomach. That's not human at all." She began sweeping the scanner around the room as Ethan tried to position himself between her and the bed. The harmonic frequency suggests a sophisticated vocal apparatus, possibly multi-chambered with resonance control that. "Sarah, you're overthinking this. It's probably just the ventilation system. These stations make all kinds of weird noises. Ventilation systems don't create melodic patterns with mathematical precision." She ducked around him and aimed the scanner at the bed. "There. Biosignature detected. High complexity, unknown classification, and..." Her voice trailed off as she stared at the readings. "Ethan, this is reading as sapient." Before he could stop her, Sarah dropped to her knees and peered under the bed. Her gasp echoed through the small quarters. "Holy Newton's apple," she breathed. "What is that thing?" Ethan sighed and helped her pull the container out. Inside, the creature had grown again, now nearly 2 feet in length. Its form was becoming more defined, with what appeared to be rudimentary limbs and a head structure that was definitely not insectoid anymore. The bioluminescent patterns had evolved into complex mandalas of light that pulsed with hypnotic beauty. "I found it yesterday in the Shadowbloom Grove," Ethan explained. "It was dying from spore poisoning, so I brought it back and treated it." "You brought back an unknown alien life form without following decontamination protocols?" Sarah's voice climbed several octaves. "Are you insane? This could be carrying anything from exotic parasites to planet-killing pathogens. It was dying, Sarah. What was I supposed to do, let it suffer? Yes. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. It's called scientific objectivity. She paused to stare at the creature again. Although I have to admit, this is the most incredible xenobiological specimen I've ever seen. Look at the cellular structure on these scans. It's like watching evolution in fast forward. The creature's humming intensified, and both scientists watched in fascination as it began to change again before their eyes. The limb buds were extending, developing what looked like fingers, while the head structure was becoming more pronounced and distinctly humanoid. This is impossible, Sarah whispered. Growth rates like this violate every principle of conservation of mass and energy. Where is it getting the raw materials for this transformation? Maybe it's converting energy directly into matter. Ethan suggested. Some quantum biological process we haven't discovered yet. That would require technology so advanced it might as well be magic. Sarah's scanner beeped insistently. Wait, I'm detecting massive quantum fluctuations in the surrounding space. It's like reality is being rewritten at the molecular level. A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Reeves. Martinez. I know you're both in there. Commander Brooks' voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with scientists who thought rules were merely suggestions. Your power consumption is lighting up every monitor in the station. Hide it, Sarah hissed, apparently having forgotten her earlier concerns about protocol violations in the face of unprecedented scientific discovery. Where? It's the size of a small child now. Bathroom. No, closet. No, wait. Open this door right now, or I'm overriding the lock, Brooks commanded. Ethan looked around frantically, then grabbed the largest lab coat he could find and threw it over the container. The creature's humming immediately became muffled, though the glow still leaked around the edges of the fabric. Act natural, he whispered to Sarah as he opened the door. Commander Brooks stood in the doorway looking like a man who'd been denied his morning coffee and was prepared to take it out on the nearest available target. His scan of the room was thorough and suspicious. What's all this equipment doing in here? He demanded, pointing at Ethan's improvised biolab setup. Personal research project, Ethan said. Studying the effects of Verdanian atmospheric conditions on Earth plant seeds. And the power spikes. Growth lamps, Sarah jumped in smoothly. High-intensity broad spectrum. Very power-hungry, but necessary for proper botanical analysis. Brooks' eyes narrowed as he spotted the lab coat draped over the container. The fabric was definitely glowing now, and a soft humming sound was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. What's under the coat? He asked. Laundry, Ethan said at the same moment Sarah said, experimental seedlings. Brooks raised an eyebrow. Glowing laundry seedlings? Bioluminescent fungal cultures, Sarah corrected quickly. Very sensitive to light exposure. We have to keep them covered. The humming grew louder, and the glow intensified. The lab coat began to move slightly as if something underneath was shifting position. Fungal cultures that sing. Brooks stepped closer to the container. It's the air circulation system interacting with the fungal respiratory processes, Ethan babbled. Creates harmonic resonances in the growth medium that produce musical tones. Very rare phenomenon. We're hoping to publish a paper on it. Musical fungus. Brooks stared at them both as if they'd claimed to have discovered a recipe for anti-gravity soup. In my 20 years of military service, I have heard some creative excuses, but musical fungus might actually be a new record. The creature chose that moment to undergo another growth spurt. The container expanded with an audible crack, and the lab coat slipped to reveal a distinctly non-fungal appendage that looked remarkably like a human arm. That's a very unusual mushroom, Brooks observed dryly. Sarah and Ethan exchanged panicked glances. The jig, as they say in the academic community, was well and truly up. Commander, Ethan began, I can explain. No need, Brooks interrupted, pulling out his communicator. I'm calling this into headquarters. We have a potential first contact situation, and I need specialists who deal with things that aren't supposed to exist. As if responding to the word contact, the creature began to emit a complex series of tones that filled the room with something that could only be described as music. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, mathematically perfect, and definitely intelligent in origin. On second thought, Brooks said, lowering his communicator, maybe we should handle this internally first. Military specialists have a tendency to shoot first and ask questions after the autopsy. The creature's song continued, weaving patterns of sound that seemed to speak directly to something deeper than hearing. For a moment, all three humans stood transfixed, united in wonder at something beyond their understanding. Then Sarah's scanner exploded in a shower of sparks, and the moment was broken. Well, Brooks said into the sudden silence, this is going to require a lot of paperwork. The transformation completed itself over the next 6 hours with the kind of biological efficiency that made Ethan question everything he'd learned about evolutionary timescales. By midday, what had once been a dying butterfly-like creature now stood as tall as Sarah, possessing an unmistakably humanoid form wrapped in what appeared to be living fabric that shifted between silver and deep blue. Her ears were the only obvious non-human feature, elongated and elegantly pointed like something from ancient Earth mythology. Everything else about her appearance suggested human physiology, albeit refined to an almost ethereal perfection that made Ethan acutely aware of his own breakfast stains and perpetually disheveled hair. So, Commander Brooks said, settling into Ethan's desk chair with the resigned air of a man whose quiet posting had just become significantly less quiet, anyone want to explain how we went from musical fungus to what appears to be an extremely attractive alien woman in my research station? The being turned toward Brooks and tilted her head with curious precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the same melodic quality as her earlier humming, but the words were perfectly clear English. Your linguistic patterns suggest hierarchical authority structure with underlying stress indicators related to bureaucratic responsibility, she said thoughtfully. You are concerned about documentation requirements for unprecedented events. She talks, Sarah whispered, her scientific mind apparently stuck on the obvious. I talk, the alien woman confirmed with what might have been amusement. I also compute, analyze, synthesize, and occasionally engage in what you might call humor, though my people's concept of comedy tends toward quantum probability jokes that don't translate well. Ethan found his voice first. Who are you? What are you? I am Lyralii of the Asterian Collective, currently serving as a scout for our expansion monitoring division. She gestured to herself with movements that were graceful beyond anything purely human. This form represents my adaptive configuration for interaction with humanoid species. My emergency pod state was the small flying form you discovered. Emergency pod state. Brooks leaned forward. You mean you crashed here? Crashed implies accident. I prefer, made an unscheduled atmospheric entry following unexpected gravitational anomalies. Less embarrassing in the mission reports. Sarah had recovered enough to start asking scientist questions. How is rapid transformation like this even possible? The energy requirements alone should be astronomical. We manipulate quantum foam at the cellular level, Lyralii explained as if discussing the weather. Matter and energy are simply different expressions of the same fundamental patterns. Reshaping one's physical matrix is no more complex than you might consider changing clothes, though admittedly it requires better spatial awareness. Quantum foam manipulation, Ethan repeated slowly. That's theoretically possible but practically impossible with our current understanding of physics. Your understanding is limited by linear thinking. You see time as a river flowing in one direction, when it's actually more like a vast ocean with currents flowing in all dimensions. Lyralii moved to the window and gazed out at the crystal forests. Your species shows remarkable potential, though. Most civilizations we encounter never develop faster than light travel, let alone establish research stations in other star systems. Most civilizations? Brooks' voice carried a note of alarm. How many alien species are out there? Several thousand in this galactic sector alone. Though most are still working through their post-industrial adolescence. Wars over energy resources, environmental destruction, tribal nationalism. The usual growing pains. Great, Brooks muttered. Cosmic teenagers with nuclear weapons. Actually, you're more like cosmic elementary students with chemical explosives. Nuclear weapons are considered remedial technology by most standards. Lyraliai's expression suggested this was meant to be reassuring. The fact that you haven't destroyed yourselves yet is quite encouraging. Ethan's mind was reeling with implications. How long have you been watching us? Approximately 3 of your centuries, though active monitoring only began when you achieved interplanetary spaceflight. Before that, you were just another promising species we check on every few decades. She turned back to them with something that might have been fondness. You're developing much faster than our projections suggested. Most species take millennia to reach your current technological level. So we're like pets? Sarah asked. More like students we're hoping will eventually qualify for advanced coursework. Though some of our council members compare you to a particularly energetic species of exploratory primates we encountered in the Vega system. I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted, Ethan said. Be flattered. Those primates eventually developed art, philosophy, and excellent interstellar cuisine. They make a soup from crystallized time streams that's absolutely remarkable. Brooks was looking increasingly overwhelmed. Why are you telling us this? Shouldn't first contact be handled through official channels? Presidents and ambassadors and people who get paid to deal with cosmic-level implications. Official channels tend to involve military responses, territorial disputes, and lengthy negotiations about trade agreements for technologies your species isn't ready to handle responsibly. Lyraliai sat on Ethan's bed with fluid grace. Informal contact allows for more natural relationship development. Plus, Ethan saved my life, which creates personal obligations that supersede diplomatic protocols. Personal obligations? Ethan asked. In my culture, preserving someone's existence creates a bond that must be honored. You risked your career and violated your species' safety protocols to help a dying creature you'd never seen before. Such compassion suggests your people might be ready for more direct interaction. Sarah was frantically taking notes on her backup scanner. This is incredible. The sociological implications alone could revolutionize our understanding of galactic civilization development. Your enthusiasm is noted and appreciated, Lyraliai said. Though I should mention that recording detailed information about our conversation might complicate things if your military authorities become involved. About that, Brooks interrupted. What exactly am I supposed to tell headquarters when they ask why our power consumption has gone haywire and strange signals are being detected throughout the station? Tell them you're conducting classified research into exotic energy phenomena. It's technically accurate and bureaucratically satisfying. Lyraliai stood and walked to Ethan's small kitchenette. Is this the food preparation area? I'm curious about human nutritional customs. You're hungry? Ethan asked. This physical form requires regular energy input, and I'm interested in experiencing human cuisine. My cultural briefing suggested something called coffee holds particular significance in your society. Oh no, Sarah said. We've created a caffeine-addicted alien. Ethan began preparing coffee while trying to process everything he'd learned. What happens now? Do you contact your people? Do we pretend this never happened? That depends largely on whether you can keep me hidden until I complete my mission assessment. Lyraliai accepted a cup of coffee and took a tentative sip. Her eyes widened in apparent delight. This is remarkably complex for a simple plant extract. I understand now why your species is so devoted to this substance. Hidden how? Brooks asked. You're an obvious non-human in a research station full of scientists. Someone's going to notice. Actually, I can modulate my appearance within certain parameters. The pointed ears are structural and can't be changed, but I can adjust other characteristics to appear more typically human. As she spoke, her hair darkened slightly and her features became marginally less perfect. Will this be sufficient for casual observation? It helps, Ethan admitted. But what about your mission assessment? I need to observe human behavior in natural settings, evaluate your species' readiness for formal contact, and report back to the collective. She took another sip of coffee. This beverage may significantly impact my assessment. Any species capable of developing something this wonderful clearly has hidden depths. Brooks rubbed his temples. So we're being judged based on our coffee? Among other factors. Your treatment of each other, your environmental stewardship, your reaction to the unknown. Lyralii looked directly at Ethan. The fact that your first instinct was to help rather than capture or study me speaks very positively for humanity. What happens if we fail your assessment? Sarah asked quietly. Nothing dramatic. We simply continue passive observation and reevaluate in another century or two. Most species require several assessment periods before they're ready for full galactic citizenship. And if we pass, then humanity joins a galactic community that spans thousands of worlds and millions of species. Access to technologies that could solve your energy crises, environmental problems, and resource limitations. Cultural exchange with civilizations that have existed for millennia. The universe becomes a much larger and more interesting place. Ethan's communicator buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the display and felt his stomach drop. Supply ship arriving ahead of schedule. ETA 6 hours. Problem? Lyralii asked. The supply ship is carrying a team of military xenobiologists, Brooks explained grimly. Standard procedure when unusual readings are detected. They'll want to investigate everything. How thorough will their investigation be? Lyralii's casual demeanor had shifted to something more alert. Extremely. They'll scan every cubic centimeter of the station looking for anomalies. Sarah looked worried. There's no way to hide quantum-level alterations from their equipment. Then we have 6 hours to figure out how to explain an alien presence without triggering a diplomatic incident, Brooks said. Any suggestions? Lyralii smiled, and for the first time since her transformation, it looked slightly predatory. Actually, I have several ideas. Though they may require you to trust me with some rather creative interpretations of the truth. Define creative, Ethan said cautiously. Let's just say that by the time the xenobiologists arrive, the official story will be that Dr. Ethan Reeves has made a groundbreaking discovery in accelerated evolution techniques, and his research assistant is a remarkable example of human adaptation to alien environments. Research assistant? Sarah asked. Someone needs to explain my presence here. Ethan rescued me, so he gets to be my official sponsor. Lyralii's grin widened. Besides, I'm genuinely curious about human scientific methodology. This could be educational for both our species. This is insane, Brooks muttered. This is diplomacy, Lyralii corrected. The insane part comes later when I have to explain to my superiors why I've become emotionally attached to a species that considers caffeinated beverages a major food group. Ethan stared at her. Emotionally attached? 3 cups of coffee in an hour. I may never leave this planet voluntarily. Despite everything, Ethan found himself laughing. Sarah joined in, followed by Brooks, and finally Lyralii herself, her musical voice adding harmony to their very human expression of bewildered amusement. Outside the window, Verdania's twin suns continued their ancient dance across alien skies, but for the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The military xenobiology team arrived with the efficiency of a surgical strike and the subtlety of a cargo hauler crash landing in a library. Colonel Miranda Voss led the inspection with the kind of methodical precision that made Ethan grateful they'd had 6 hours to prepare their story. Dr. Reeves, Colonel Voss said, reviewing her data pad as she entered his quarters, your research reports mention breakthrough developments in adaptive evolutionary acceleration. I'm here to verify these claims and assess any potential security implications. Of course, Colonel. Ethan gestured toward Lyralii, who was sitting at his workstation wearing a lab coat and looking remarkably convincing as a human research assistant. "This is Dr. Lyra Asterin, my colleague from the University of New Geneva. She's been instrumental in developing our techniques." Lyra stood and extended her hand with perfect human etiquette. "Colonel Voss, I've heard remarkable things about military scientific protocols. I'm eager to demonstrate our work." "Dr. Asterin." Voss shook her hand, then paused, studying Lyraliai's face with the intensity of someone trained to notice details. "Interesting genetic markers. Your ancestry suggests some unusual heritage. Northern European with some Arctic indigenous influences," Lyraliai replied smoothly. "The extreme cold adaptation genes sometimes produce distinctive features. Pointed ears are an Arctic adaptation. Improved thermal regulation and enhanced acoustic sensitivity for survival in harsh environments. Quite useful for field research work." Sarah stepped forward with a data pad full of fabricated research. "The evolutionary acceleration process involves controlled exposure to quantum field fluctuations generated by Verdania's unique crystalline geology. Dr. Asterin volunteered to be our first human test subject. Human experimentation requires extensive ethical review," Voss noted sharply. "All protocols were followed," Brooks interjected from the doorway. "I personally supervised the safety measures." This was technically true, since Brooks had been supervising their attempts not to get caught hiding an alien, though Ethan doubted that's what the colonel had in mind. Voss began scanning the room with sophisticated equipment that made their jury-rigged detection systems look like children's toys. "I'm reading significant quantum disturbances throughout this section of the station. Energy signatures consistent with advanced metamorphic processes. The quantum field generators leave residual traces," Ethan explained, hoping his hastily researched terminology would hold up under scrutiny. "We're still learning to minimize the environmental impact." "Show me the process," Voss commanded. Lyraliai and Ethan exchanged glances. They'd anticipated this request and prepared accordingly, though their solution was admittedly unconventional. "The demonstration requires one of Verdania's native specimens," Lyraliai said, pulling out a container holding several of the six-legged squirrel creatures that had been pestering Ethan since his arrival. "We've learned to accelerate their natural adaptive capabilities." She placed her hands around the container and began to hum softly. The squirrel things immediately perked up, their fur shifting from brown to silvery blue to match the ambient lighting. One of them sprouted tiny wing membranes between its legs and began gliding around the container. "Remarkable," Voss breathed, her scientific curiosity overriding her military suspicion. "How do you generate the quantum field effect?" "Bioelectric resonance," Lyraliai explained, which was technically accurate if you ignored the fact that her bioelectric system operated on principles that wouldn't be discovered by humans for several centuries. "The process requires very specific neural patterns that take years to develop." "And you learned this technique how, exactly?" "Meditation, biofeedback training, and an unfortunate amount of trial and error," Lyraliai said with complete honesty. "Plus several very patient mentors who taught me to think beyond conventional limitations." Voss spent the next 4 hours conducting increasingly detailed scans and tests. Lyraliai passed every examination by the simple expedient of being exactly what she claimed to be, a highly advanced individual conducting legitimate scientific research. The fact that her advancement came from an alien civilization rather than human universities was a detail that somehow never came up directly. "These results are unprecedented," Voss finally admitted as her team prepared to leave. "Dr. Asterin, I'd like to request that you consider transferring to our Advanced Research Division. The military applications of your techniques could be revolutionary." "Thank you, Colonel, but I'm committed to pure research rather than military applications," Lyraliai replied diplomatically. "Though I appreciate the recognition. We'll be monitoring your work closely. Breakthroughs of this magnitude require careful oversight." Voss paused at the door. "Dr. Reeves, you're fortunate to have such a talented colleague. Don't let her get recruited away by competing institutions." After the military team departed, the four of them sat in Ethan's quarters sharing a bottle of Verdanian fruit wine that Sarah had been saving for special occasions. "I can't believe that worked," Brooks said, refilling his glass. "When she started questioning your genetic markers, I thought we were finished." Military personnel are trained to detect deception, not to recognize entirely different species operating within truthful parameters, Lyralii explained. "I never lied to her. I simply allowed her to draw conclusions based on incomplete information." "So what happens now?" Ethan asked. "Do you complete your assessment and leave?" Lyralii was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Verdania's crystalline forests. "My assessment period was supposed to last 6 months. I've been here less than a week, and I've already learned more about humanity than 3 centuries of passive observation revealed." "Good things or bad things?" Sarah asked nervously. "Remarkable things. Your species shows an extraordinary capacity for growth, adaptation, and compassion." Ethan risked his career to save a dying creature he'd never seen before. "All of you risked serious consequences to protect me from military interrogation. That level of ethical development usually takes civilizations millennia to achieve. So we pass?" Brooks asked. "With distinction. I'll be recommending immediate elevation to contact-ready status, with a suggestion for careful diplomatic introduction rather than dramatic revelation." Lyralii turned back to them with a smile. "Though I may request an extended assignment to continue studying your coffee brewing techniques." "Extended assignment?" Ethan felt something flutter in his chest that might have been hope. The collective values thorough research. Establishing ongoing cultural exchange programs takes time and careful planning. Someone needs to serve as liaison during the transition period. She looked directly at him. "I can think of worse postings than working with humans who appreciate both scientific discovery and excellent beverages. What about your people? Won't they wonder why you want to stay?" "I'll tell them I've become fascinated by human potential and want to study your development patterns more closely." "It's completely true." She paused. "I may not mention that I've also become fascinated by one particular human who saw a dying creature and chose compassion over protocol." Ethan felt his face flush. "Lyralii. Don't worry, I'll be very professional in my reports. The collective doesn't need to know that their scout has developed what humans call a crush on her research subject." Sarah nearly choked on her wine. "A crush? An advanced alien civilization has scouts who develop crushes?" "Emotional attachment is a universal constant," Lyralii said primly. "Though my people express it through harmonized quantum resonance patterns rather than awkward verbal stumbling." "I don't stumble," Ethan protested. "You've been stumbling since I started talking to you," Brooks observed with amusement. "It's actually quite endearing in a painfully obvious sort of way. Thanks for the support, Commander." Lyralii stood and moved to the window again, her silhouette framed against the alien sunset. "There's something else you should know. My ship isn't actually damaged beyond repair. I could leave whenever I choose." The room fell silent. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Why haven't you?" "Because for the first time in my very long life, I've found something worth staying for." She turned back to them. 3 somethings, actually. Scientific discovery, genuine friendship, and coffee that defies all rational explanation. 3 things? Sarah asked. "And one completely irrational emotional attachment to a xenobiologist who talks to squirrel creatures and thinks rule-breaking is acceptable when lives are at stake." Lyralii walked over to Ethan and took his hands. "My people live for thousands of years. We think in terms of centuries and plan in terms of millennia. But you've taught me that some moments are worth more than all the time in the universe." Lyralii, I. "Don't say anything yet. I've submitted my recommendation for formal contact, but the collective's decision process takes time. I estimate 6 months before they reach a conclusion." Her smile was radiant. "Plenty of time to teach you proper quantum harmonics, learn more about human emotional expression, and develop an unhealthy addiction to your planet's caffeinated beverages. And if they decide humanity isn't ready? Ethan asked. Then I'll resign my commission and become a full-time student of human culture. I suspect there's more to learn here than a lifetime of official missions could teach me. Brooks raised his glass. To unprecedented scientific discoveries, successful diplomatic deception, and aliens with excellent taste in coffee. To new friendships that transcend species barriers, Sarah added. To compassionate xenobiologists who save dying creatures without considering the consequences, Lyralii contributed. Ethan looked around at his friends, raised his own glass, and felt something shift inside him. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely researcher cataloging alien plants and complaining about stolen lunch rations. Now he was part of something larger than himself, something that connected worlds and species and possibilities he'd never imagined. To taking chances on the impossible, he said finally. And to finding out that sometimes the impossible takes chances on you too. Outside the window, Verdania's crystal forests chimed in harmony with the evening wind, and somewhere among the stars, ancient civilizations waited to welcome humanity to a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to dream. Ethan had always been good at finding patterns in alien biology, but he'd never expected to find his place in the universe by saving a tiny creature that turned out to be the most important discovery of his life. As Lyralii's hand found his and her musical laughter joined their very human celebration, he realized that some patterns were worth more than scientific papers. Some patterns were worth everything.